You know how some people say there's always that one sentence that rearranges your life? For me, it wasn't whispered, or joked, or half meant. My boss looked straight at me, in a room full of people who pretended not to hear, and said, "You'll always be last here." I didn't react, not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd learned long before that showing anything in that office was like bleeding near sharks. So I just sat there, the conference room lights buzzing overhead, while he scrolled through a deck that I had stayed up until 2 a.m. fixing. He didn't mention my name once. Not the research, not the forecasting model I built, not the corrections that saved him from presenting a $400,000 error to the board last quarter. Nothing. And still, that wasn't the part that really got me. It was the way he smiled when he said it, like he'd been waiting, like he finally found a clean way to remind me where he thought my place was. I'm not dramatic. I don't throw things. I don't storm out. I don't build my identity around being underestimated. But in that moment, something very, very quiet clicked into place. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. A kind I hadn't felt in months. I should explain how I got there. I was hired as a junior data analyst 2 years earlier, the kind of role companies rely on but never highlight. I wasn't brilliant or extraordinary. I was the guy who double-checked everyone's numbers, who fixed broken formulas, who rewrote slides at the last minute so they wouldn't embarrass senior management. I kept things running by simply refusing to let things fall apart. And because I wasn't loud about it, nobody cared much about the work, except my boss, who loved taking credit for it. He wasn't incompetent. That's important. He was strategic, ambitious, polished, good at talking in circles until people thanked him for confusing them. His weakness wasn't skill, but arrogance. He believed that as long as he could dress a half-truth in corporate language, people would accept it without blinking. And honestly, he was right, most of the time. But he also depended on me, more than he realized. Because while he was busy managing optics, I was managing results. I built every dashboard he used. I maintained every data set. When numbers didn't match, I was the one who found the missing transactions or mislabeled entries. I kept backups, not out of suspicion then, but because I hated losing work. Each quarter, each revision, each email instruction, every "fix this fast," all neatly archived, all time-stamped. So when he told me I'd always be last, he didn't know he was saying it to the one person who saw exactly how deep his shortcuts went. After the meeting, nobody said anything. A few people avoided eye contact, which was its own answer. Someone patted my shoulder on the way out, the kind of gesture that's more about them feeling decent than you feeling supported. My boss walked past me, humming, already planning the next deck I'd be ghostwriting. I stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs, the half-erased whiteboard, the condensation ring from his untouched water bottle. It felt like standing backstage after the performer had left, the lights still warm, the room still echoing with something I didn't want to carry anymore. When I finally walked out, I didn't go back to my desk. I went straight to the elevator, down to the lobby, and out into the cold evening air, without telling anyone I was leaving early. On the bus home, I kept replaying the moment in my head. Not the insult, but the tone, the certainty, the way he said it like it was a law of physics. By the time I reached my apartment, the building felt too quiet. I dropped my bag by the door and opened my laptop on the kitchen table. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands on the keys, not typing. Then I opened the folder, the one I hadn't touched in months. Q4 revisions, original. Forecast model, V1 V12. Email, instructions. Backups, clean copies, raw data, untouched projections, every version of every file before he polished them. The digital equivalent of a diary I didn't know I'd been keeping. I scrolled through them in silence, every discrepancy, every convenient adjustment, every time he ignored a risk flag because it would complicate his narrative. Until that night, this was none of my business. My job wasn't to judge. It was to do the work and keep the machine running. But now, after the meeting, after those words, something shifted. Not because he hurt my pride, but because suddenly I could no longer pretend I didn't see the cracks he kept covering with my work. And I realized something else, something simple, obvious, and impossible to unsee. He'd been using me to build a story he couldn't defend on his own. I closed the laptop, sat back, and exhaled. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't plan anything at all. I just knew for the first time since joining that company that I was done helping him hide the truth. And that decision, quiet as it was, would take me somewhere I never expected. Into the boardroom, across from the people he thought would never hear my voice. The morning after that meeting hit different. Not louder, not colder, just sharper. Like every sound in the office had edges. I walked in the same way I always did, badge tapping the same metal reader, same stale coffee smell creeping out of the break room. But something in me had shifted, and because nobody else knew about it, the whole building felt slightly tilted, like a picture frame that's off by a millimeter, but impossible to ignore. My boss was already at his desk. He didn't greet me. He just pushed his chair back an inch and slid a printed report across the table without looking up. "Fix the projections," he said. "They need to look stronger, not be stronger. Look stronger." It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that, but now, with the previous day echoing in my head, the words landed differently. I picked up the report. The numbers were wrong, optimistic to the point of dishonesty. Based on these projections, we were supposed to hit a growth curve that had zero relationship to reality. Any investor with a pulse would spot the problem, unless they were distracted by flashy visuals or a confident voice promising miracles. And that confident voice was always his. I didn't argue. That was part of the pattern. He issued vague instructions, and I translated them into something that wouldn't get us sued. But today, when I sat down at my desk and opened the raw data, a line I'd never crossed before drew itself clearly in my mind. If I altered numbers again, knowing they were misleading, I'd be complicit. No boardroom could save me from that. So I didn't alter anything. I corrected mistakes. I documented everything. Around noon, he appeared at the side of my desk, leaning one hand on the edge like he owned not just the desk, but me, along with it. "How's it coming?" I turned the monitor slightly so he could see. "The original data doesn't support the previous forecast. These are the real numbers." He studied the screen with a blank face, the kind he used when he was deciding whether to blow up or pretend to be reasonable. "This isn't what we need to show next week," he said finally. "That's because next week needs accuracy," I replied, keeping my voice level. "We can't promise numbers we can't hit." His jaw flexed. Just once. A small, almost invisible movement. But I saw it. "Fix it," he repeated. "I won't fabricate growth," I said quietly. He stared at me for a full 3 seconds. Then he smiled. Slow, polite, the kind of smile people give right before shutting a door in your face. "You're overthinking again. That's why you don't move up." Then he walked away. I didn't chase him. I didn't explain. I just saved every version of the file, took screenshots of instructions, and added them to the archive I'd opened the night before. By mid-afternoon, something unusual happened. An email from internal compliance landed in my inbox. Short, formal, impersonal. "Please confirm availability for a brief review of reporting procedures." Nothing else. No context. No attachments. But I knew exactly what it was. The report I'd sent the night before, the one I thought would take weeks to crawl through bureaucracy, hadn't crawled. It had sprinted, and then, an hour later, another message. This time from finance. "Can we discuss discrepancies in the Q3 and Q4 projections?" They never reached out to me directly. They always went through him. Always. But not today. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He called me into a small meeting room, the one with the flickering light that nobody bothered to fix. He shut the door, folded his arms, and said, "What's going on?" "Finance wants clarification on the numbers," I said, "and compliance wants to review reporting steps." He frowned. "Why? What did you say to them? I haven't spoken to anyone yet, I replied, which was true. They had contacted me first. His eyes narrowed. Show me your inbox. That was the moment I finally saw him for who he really was. Not confident, not powerful, not untouchable. Just scared. Scared of losing control over the narrative he'd built. I didn't show him my inbox. I didn't have to. Instead, I said, "You should prepare your explanations. They're going to ask about the forecasts." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. Don't overcomplicate this. If they ask, you tell them everything was a team effort, that we aligned numbers together." "No," I said. The word came out so simply that it surprised even me. No anger, no defiance. Just a boundary, clean and solid. He blinked, confused for a second, as if he hadn't planned for the possibility that I might not obey. "Don't make this difficult," he muttered. But the truth was, I wasn't making anything difficult. He had done that to himself. By the end of the day, I had gathered the remaining files, verified timestamps, and ensured each document matched the raw source data. Every detail lined up. Every number trail was clean. Not a single piece could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. When I left the office, I didn't feel triumphant or righteous. I felt steady, like someone who had finally stopped convincing himself that silence was the safer choice. As I walked home, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite, an unfamiliar name, department I'd never interacted with before. Preliminary review meeting, mandatory attendance, and then below it, a second line that made my pulse tighten just slightly. Additional participants to be confirmed. I didn't know it yet, but that small meeting room was about to become the place where everything shifted. The week that followed felt like watching my office split open along hairline fractures no one else had noticed. It started quietly, too quietly. People who normally ignored me began hovering near my desk, not talking to me, not asking anything, just studying the air around me like they sensed a change but couldn't identify its shape. My boss felt it too. He showed up earlier each morning, tie already fastened, sleeves perfectly ironed, hair combed with deliberate precision. The man who used to breeze in at 9:27 with a latte and an excuse now sat rigidly in his chair at 8:03, clicking through spreadsheets he barely understood. Every few minutes he glanced at me as though waiting for a crack to appear in my expression, a tell, a confession, a slip. Nothing appeared. On Wednesday, an email went out to our entire division. Unexpected internal review in preparation for board discussions. Please ensure all reporting documentation is readily accessible. People groaned. My boss didn't. His jaw tightened, just a little. That afternoon he called me into his office, shutting the door with a soft click. "We need to align our narrative," he said, folding his hands like a man negotiating a plea deal. "There may be questions about the forecasts. I need to know what you plan to say." "I plan to say the truth," I said. He didn't raise his voice, but something cold passed over his face. "You're not helping yourself by being righteous. They don't respect idealists. They respect results." "Then they'll want accurate ones," I replied. He leaned forward. "Listen, if we stick together, this will blow over. If not..." His voice trailed off, like he wanted me to finish the threat for him. I didn't. I simply stood, nodded politely, and left. The first review meeting happened the next day in a narrow glass room overlooking the parking lot. 3 people I barely knew introduced themselves from compliance and finance. They didn't accuse. They didn't pressure. They asked for clarification. Clean, simple questions. Who prepared this model? When was this version finalized? Were you instructed to make changes? By whom? I answered plainly. No embellishment, no commentary. Just facts. Every statement I made matched a time-stamped file. They took notes, lots of them. My boss wasn't in that meeting, but when I walked out, I saw him standing near the printer, pretending to sort papers. He watched them leave. Then he looked at me. "Everything okay?" he asked lightly, too lightly. "Everything's accurate," I said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Good. Accuracy is important. By Friday, the tension had weight. People whispered in corners. My boss lurked near any conversation that stopped when he approached. When finance scheduled a second meeting, this time inviting both of us, he tried to hide his nerves, but the way he shuffled the papers gave him away. During that meeting, he talked fast, filling gaps no one asked him to fill. He explained decisions no one questioned. He used phrases like industry standard adjustments and strategic alignment of projections, each one landing with a dull thud. When they asked him to show the original data for a particular revision, he froze. I don't have the raw file, he finally said. I opened my laptop and pulled it up in 3 seconds. Silence shifted the air. He tried to recover, saying, "Yes, that's one of them." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. After the meeting, he followed me into the hallway, not yelling, not threatening, worse, pleading. "You need to understand," he said, "projects like this don't succeed unless everyone plays their part. You and I, we've always been a team." "We weren't a team," I said quietly. "I did the work. You took the credit." His face tightened, but I wasn't finished. "And now you want us to share the consequences too?" For the first time since I'd met him, he had no answer. Monday morning arrived with an email marked high priority. Subject: Board Audit Committee, Methodology Review. My name was listed under presenters. I read it 3 times. He read it once and went pale. "They don't need you in that room," he said, voice cracking under the veneer. "You'll only confuse them. They'll expect leadership to speak." "They asked for the person who built the data," I replied. "That's me." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "If you go in there and frame this the wrong way—" "I'm not framing anything," he rubbed his forehead. "You don't understand how these people think. They need a coherent story. If you make them doubt, if you make me look—" "This isn't about you looking bad," I said. "It's about the numbers being real." For a moment, I thought he might break, crack open and confess everything, beg for help, something. But instead, he straightened his tie, exhaled sharply through his nose, and said, "Just remember who signs your evaluations." That sentence didn't land the way he hoped. It didn't scare me. It clarified him. The boardroom meeting was scheduled for Thursday. By Tuesday afternoon, he was scrambling, calling late meetings, changing slide decks, pulling analysts into his office to cross-check material he should have understood months ago. People began avoiding him because they sensed desperation, and desperation in management is contagious. On Wednesday evening, after most of the office had left, I stayed a little later to finalize the clean data set for the board. I wasn't dressing it up. I wasn't making a speech. I was simply preparing the truth. He walked over slowly, like approaching something dangerous. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can fix this together." "We could have," I said, "a long time ago." He swallowed. "If you take this to the board, there's no going back." He was right. But what he didn't understand was that I'd already gone forward. As he stood there, waiting for me to break, to hesitate, to give him something, anything, he could twist back into control, I realized something simple. The man who once treated the room like a stage was now terrified of the audience. I closed my laptop, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." And then I walked out, leaving him alone beneath the cold office lights. What I didn't know yet was that the board wasn't just reviewing numbers. They were preparing consequences. The boardroom wasn't what I expected. Movies make these places feel grand. Towering ceilings, marble gold, something dramatic. But ours was just a long table. 12 chairs, a muted rug, and a faint smell of coffee someone brewed too early and forgot to enjoy. What made it intimidating wasn't the room itself. It was the people inside it. 3 board members, the CFO, 2 from audit, legal counsel, and my boss, seated at the far end, hands clasped tightly enough that his knuckles blanched. When I walked in, no one smiled. They weren't angry, not yet. They were curious. That's worse. Curiosity means they're paying attention. The chairwoman nodded to me. You're the primary architect of the forecasting models, correct? Yes. And you prepared the versions used in Q3 and Q4? I prepared the originals, I said. Some versions were altered after submission. My boss jumped in before she could respond. We collaborated on those. Any discrepancies are normal alignment steps. No one acknowledged him. That was the first shift in the room. The audit director adjusted her glasses. Walk us through your methodology. I connected my laptop to the screen. No dramatics, no performance. I opened the raw data sets, the formulas, the revision logs, the backup folders with timestamps visible. Every step was simple, clean, and documented. They asked questions. I answered. My boss tried to interject. The CFO finally held up a hand. Let him finish. He went silent like someone had unplugged him. I showed the original projections, then the versions after his edits. I explained why the altered numbers were unrealistic. They didn't match market conditions, didn't reflect revenue patterns, didn't account for churn risk. I showed the emails where he told me the numbers needed to look stronger, the comments suggesting optimistic framing, the red flags I had documented months earlier. The room didn't react dramatically, no gas, no accusations, just a slow, collective tightening of posture. The chairwoman tapped a pen lightly. Why didn't these concerns surface earlier? I raised them informally, I said, but the decisions weren't mine to make. My boss seized the opening. Exactly. These were routine directional adjustments. He misunderstood. Stop. The legal counsel's voice was calm but final. Your instructions contradict compliance policy, and you did not disclose adjustments in your submitted reports. For a moment, I thought my boss might try to fight his way out. He inhaled sharply, shoulders squared, lips parting to deliver one of his trademark monologues. But then he exhaled, and the fight left him entirely. He sagged back in his chair, eyes fixed on the table's surface, as though the grain patterns might reveal an escape. The meeting continued without him. After an hour of review, the board dismissed everyone except me. My pulse thudded, expecting interrogation, blame, something heavy. Instead, the chairwoman folded her hands. Thank you for your transparency. Your documentation was thorough. You've protected the company from significant exposure. Another board member added, and from approving a strategy built on inaccurate data. I nodded, unsure what to say. Human Resources will contact you. The chairwoman continued. Expect a conversation about your future here. When I stepped out of the room, my boss was sitting alone in the hallway. He didn't look up. His hands were trembling slightly. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered every late night he dumped on me, every lie he painted as strategy, every moment he used my silence as a stepping stone. He wasn't falling because of me. He was falling because sooner or later, the truth weighs more than the story holding it down. The next morning, an all-company email announced his resignation due to personal reasons. No details, no praise, no farewell statement drafted by communications. Just a single paragraph that felt like a door closing. People whispered all day. Nobody asked me outright, but more than one person gave me a look that said they knew enough. HR called me in the afternoon. The meeting was surprisingly straightforward. They thanked me. They acknowledged the risk I took. They offered a salary increase and a promotion, senior analyst, direct reporting line to a VP who actually understood numbers. No strings, no conditions. I asked for time to think. They gave it. But the funny thing was, I didn't need it. Because 2 weeks earlier, a recruiter from another firm had reached out on LinkedIn. I hadn't responded then. I did now. And within 3 days, they made an offer. Higher pay, quieter office, clearer expectations, no politics disguised as leadership. An environment where competence mattered more than performance theater. On Friday, I walked into my old office one last time. Not out of nostalgia, but to collect the pieces of my life I'd left in drawers and folders. A few colleagues stopped by. Nothing dramatic, just nods, short handshakes, brief goodbyes that felt honest. As I headed toward the elevator, I heard footsteps behind me. I knew who it was before I turned. My former boss stood there, eyes hollow, suit rumpled in a way I had never seen. "They took everything," he said quietly. "Title, bonus, severance." I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't owe him anything. "You built your reports on a lie," I said. "They just removed the story." He swallowed hard. "You're leaving?" "Yes." He looked away, jaw tightening, not in anger this time, but in recognition. "I underestimated you," he said. "I shouldn't have." "You didn't underestimate me," I replied. "You underestimated the weight of your own shortcuts." He didn't follow me after that. He just stood there, a man finally forced to see himself without applause. I stepped into the elevator. The door slid shut slowly, giving me a last glimpse of the office that had shaped me, drained me, and unknowingly prepared me for something better. When I walked into my new company the following Monday, nobody knew me as the guy who stayed late, or fixed everyone's mistakes, or absorbed blame that wasn't his. They only knew me as the person they hired because he knew what he was doing, and because he didn't bend data to fit someone else's ego. The work felt lighter, the air felt cleaner, and for the first time, when I opened a forecasting model, I wasn't double-checking someone else's lie. I was building something real. My former boss once told me I'd always be last. He was right, in one way. I was last there, because I'd already outgrown the place long before I walked out the door.